So let's start off with where we're at right now. 6 consecutive months of growth. The second best January ever, up 18% compared to last year. And our first quarter outlook is at about 2.2 million containers, or a 20% year-on-year increase compared to Q1 of last year.
So how would you assess then the overall health of the global supply chain relative to what we saw during the pandemic? Because like Paul said, it seemed like everyone was suddenly talking about the supply chain. And where are we relative to just a few years ago?
Emily, I think we're in a lot better shape. We've learned a lot from what we saw then too, but we're front of mind now to so many people outside our general industry, whether it's us looking for our packages, what's on the store shelves, or just the general consciousness about how this port, supply chain, and trade business impacts economies and jobs around the world. What we see in Los Angeles is that there are a couple things happening right now. The stability of that labor contract has given us about a 4 percentage point boost in market share. So some of that cargo that we lost during the protracted negotiations has started to come back. Not all of it, much more work to do, but good trajectory. Now, with the Panama Canal suffering drought and the concerns of safety in the Middle East with respect to the Houthi going after the ships and the cargo and oil tankers, you're starting to see more cargo shifted our way. Not services being collapsed, not new vessels coming in, but higher levels of capacity and utilization, and importers and exporters saying, I may not want to take that much time, but the bigger difference is the gap between cargo that's moving east and Gulf Coast versus the West Coast is wider from a freight cost perspective. That's important because we're right now in the middle of our annual contracting season for freight.
All right, so you're, again, right on the port of Los Angeles on the West Coast. You probably have the best view of anybody trade with China. What's it like now? What's your expectation for that important route of trade coming from China to your port?
Paul, it's still our most dominant trading partner. 53% of Port of Los Angeles business is with China. Now, that's down from 57% at the end of year 2022, and it may drop into the mid-40s as many supply chain executives are continuing with their China plus one strategy, looking at other locations to source and produce goods in. But still, 45, 50 years of supply chain relationships exist. You don't tear that apart overnight.
Right.
Just the other day, the White House said that they were concerned that more than 200 ship-to-shore cranes at U.S. ports are manufactured by China and can be serviced and programmed remotely, creating a cybersecurity vulnerability. What did you make of those comments? How legitimate are the White House's concerns?
Oh, it's also very important to us. The Port of Los Angeles, Emily, was the first in the nation to create a cybersecurity operations center back in 2014 with the help of the Department of Homeland Security. Today, that system is stopping more than 60 million cyber intrusion attempts per month. It also gave us awareness to create a cyber resilience center, also one of the first in the world to bring in the private sector partners with us. That co-helped with the IBM folks, it has now stopped a half a dozen cyber intrusion attempts to private sector interests that they were otherwise unaware of. So this work must continue.
Give us that update. You mentioned the Panama Canal. I'm fascinated by the Panama Canal. I read a great book on it. I'll find the author later. It's phenomenal how they built that thing. So what's wrong with the Panama Canal? There's a drought, and so the water levels are lower, so they're not taking the amount of freight they typically take?
That's exactly it. And you think about a vessel at full capacity, they can't load to the top. And the transits through the canal are down some 23%, according to published reports thus far this year. Now, the Port Authority folks switched on. They're railing cargo from the Pacific side to the Atlantic for onward carriage to Europe and North America, but it's just not enough. And that's why this capacity issue is so important.
The Path Between the Seas, David McCullough. That's the book. Phenomenal about the history of the Panama Canal.
Some weekend reading.
It's more than a weekend. It's a beast. All right, so Gene, so is your business, I mean, it's a GDP business? Is that how you kind of plan it out here? And so do you get a sense of, are your customers, what are they telling you about their sense of the economy?
Broadly speaking, most are upbeat. 70% of our GDP is tied to you and me buying goods. Yep. Now, although the consumer purchasing was down a little bit in January, it was not unexpected. Great sales for the holiday season, nearly $1 trillion, up 3.8%. Last year, there was going to be a little bit of a lull in January, but the forward look is strong. The Atlanta Fed is currently estimating first quarter GDP around 2.9%, healthier than some had expected, and fourth quarter GDP came in beyond expectations. Again, what we see in the forward look is an order cycle that runs about 6 months ahead of when we actually buy things in the store or online. That inventory flow as a leading economic indicator appears good.
So, Gene, I'm the captain of this big monster ship. I got my containers all over the place. How they don't fall off, I have no idea. I come into your port. How long am I there before I get back on my way?
I look at these vital statistics, as I call them, Paul, every morning, and we're at or better than when we were pre-COVID. The largest ships that come into the Port of Los Angeles average 12,000 containers on and off, best in the industry every call. 4.5 days is the amount of time a ship is in port working. That's right where it should be.
All right. See, I think those things. On my bucket list is to go on a cruise on one of those big things. And then every time I say that, people will email in and says that you do not want to go on one of those trips because it's not like you're going on the Queen Mary or anything. It's tough conditions for those folks that work on their ships.